We talked about the Jordan Peterson phenomenon, and there's something I want to ask you about with regard to this, because it's a question I've been thinking about for a long time. As a person who is a Christian who tries to write books as much as I can that speak to the credibility of the Christian faith in as it pertains to current cultural moments and current cultural trends, because I do believe, to quote Leslie Newbegin, that the gospel and the person of Christ is actually eternally contemporary, though he operated in an ancient world far different than 21st century, the 21st century world, and in the Middle East as opposed to the West. He keeps being relevant over and over again to our current cultural moment. So I try to write books that argue to Christianity, not necessarily from Christianity, and seen some success with that. But a lot of Christian writers who do a good job understanding things aren't having or haven't had the same effect that non-Christian writers have had on the culture when it comes to the Bible. Jordan Peterson being one of them. And of course, famously sort of, not outed isn't the right word, but sort of famously made clear that he wasn't a Christian when he did the Surrounded debate, where a kid asked him, basically, you're a Christian, right? He says, no, you're saying that. And everyone sort of realized, oh, we've been a little bit overzealous in our use of the word Christian. But my point here is that he and others, and I would take even some of the speakers at a conference that you and I have been to, the ARC conference over in London, some of those speakers who speak are sort of Christian adjacent. And they have this tremendous impact where people are starting to read the Bible and take it seriously again, but they're non-Christians writing about Christian-y things. So my question to you would be, as someone who speaks into this space and understands this kind of stuff, what do you account for the fact that non-Christians writing about Christianity seem to have as much or greater impact as Christians writing about it do?
That's a great question. There are a lot of complicated factors. I think I would say part of the answer is mundane stuff about, marketing and publishing access and that sort of thing. I think a good example of this might be the British historian Tom Holland,
Mm-hmm.
who, his book Dominion generated a lot of conversation, but Holland himself, I think, struggles with approaching Christian faith himself personally. He had a good discussion with Peter Williams recently where
Mm-hmm.
they, very respectful dialogue back and forth, but in the end, Holland sounded, honestly not too different from a guy like Bart Ehrman, except that he's a lot more winsome and friendly, and so he presents these things in a way that Christians kind of feel more comfortable chatting with him. But I think there can be a tendency of people to tune out Christian voices because they kind of think, well, of course you're going to say that. That's your job, right?
Yeah.
You're a professional. You're a pastor. You're a theologian. You're a Christian historian. So Rodney Stark is an example of a Christian historian who was out there kind of writing these books years before Holland got around to it,
Yeah.
but nowhere near as many people bought them, right? And so then Holland comes out, writes Dominion. It's like, oh my gosh, I never thought about this before.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit like that in his own kind of distinct way with Jordan Peterson, because he's repackaging things that are quite, for Christians, it's like, yeah, you think? This
Mm-hmm.
is not like earth-shattering.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a little bit like, when a teenager's mom tells him, hey, you need to clean your room. He's like, okay, mom. Like, of course my mom's going to tell me to clean my room. But Jordan Peterson says, clean your room. It's like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I really need to clean my room.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's the outsider factor sort of it's a coolness factor in a way. It's kind
Mm-hmm.
of it's like, well, okay, if that guy is saying it, then he's got to be coming at this without an agenda, right? Without his own kind of bias. So there really must be something to this. I really
Mm-hmm.
need to go explore it.
Yeah.
And I feel like, that's a little bit unfair in a way. It's sort of like in academia, if you're trying to write about the Bible or the New Testament and you want to cite somebody who's a more conservative scholar, you're going to encounter resistance to that because, like, oh, well, why are you that person is an apologist?
Mm-hmm.
Why would you cite him? It's like, because I think he's a good scholar and he's doing good research, and it's like um, there's an intrinsic assumption that, well, there's got to be some kind of a subjective thing this person has got going. He can't really have come to this conclusion objectively.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that helps kind of explain the kind of aura around these people. Um, and there's also the just the sort of the interest and the excitement of like, well, where are they going to go next, like in their own personal journey,
Hmm.
like is Peterson going to become a Christian or is he not? And there's a kind of a almost like a soap opera like drama around that. um, and sadly in Peterson's case, he's just become very ill and he's really
Yeah.
kind of faded, I think, from, I mean, I feel bad sometimes when I talk about him in the past tense. It's like he's not dead, like
Right.
he's still out there, but he's no longer really engaged in the conversation,
Hmm.
and I'm sad about that.
Yeah, me too. Well, me too. I heard him for the first time at the ARC conference last year, live. I've heard him before, obviously on video and that kind of thing, but I never heard him live before. And to see him sort of go on without notes and do his thing is really something. I'll tell you one thing about him that I find fascinating. So I'm going to speak about him in the present tense.
Yeah.
What he did at the ARC conference in the past is indicative of the kind of thing he does in terms of his attitude. Was when he was actually moderating a panel discussion, he did this thing where he would lean in, probably because of his psychologist days. He would lean in and really listen to the panelist and then have the panelists steer the discussion as opposed to being the moderator who steered the discussion. I found that fascinating and quite refreshing, which suggests a teachability, a learner's mindset, and living up to that phrase he has in his book, where assume that someone else in the room is smarter than you on at least one thing. And I thought that was really quite refreshing. But the point you made was really good one. I think is the there's a character arc to the idea that someone has growth. You don't watch a movie where the guy stays the same when the character is introduced as A, and he stays A pretty much the same, even keel throughout the entire movie. Sometimes he stays A, he gets corrupted, he gets something, he gets cynical, and then he comes back to himself. That's a great character arc. Sometimes he's this terrible person who becomes a moral person at the end. That's a character arc. A guy who stays the same the whole time is kind of boring. You don't want to watch that drama. But with folks like Tom Holland and Jordan Peterson and a few others too, you see a sort of a character arc developing, and you can't wait to see what unfolds next. That's a really good insight. I didn't think about it that way.
Well, and I mean, I guess I should qualify that a little bit, is that I do think sometimes people get their hopes up that there's going to be more of an arc
Yeah.
than there actually turns out to be. Um, I got a little bit irritated at a certain point with all the podcasts and the takes, like, Jordan Peterson is about to become a Christian, or he just said this, or
Yeah.
Tom Holland is about to, I think, is he a Christian yet? Like somebody asked me, and I'm like, no, he's not, and I don't think he's going to be in the near future.
Hmm.
It's not really like that. I think just because these guys are curious and friendly and articulate and willing to have, friendly dialogue with Christians, it really doesn't mean that they're on the cusp of something. So I do think I saw a lot of wishful thinking along those lines, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Well, but that speaks to something as well. Is that with that wishful thinking, we sort of impose a Hollywood script onto life, and it almost
Yeah.
never works
Yep.
out that way.
Sure.
Sometimes it does, rarely, and that's the reason why we go to the movies, because we see resolution um, that's neat and tidy, where we don't see it necessarily in the real world. So we have that escapism, but we impose it on the real world, and we get hopeful. Tom Holland's a Christian, or Jordan Peterson's a Christian, or whatever it might be. Which is why what happened with The Surrounded was so sort of like deflating. It seemed like the
That
end
was
of
really
act.
sad.
Yeah.
In my understanding of how that was set up is that there was a failure to communicate clearly with everybody, so that the young people thought they were going to be debating a Christian,
Hmm.
um, and then they were really coming at Peterson hard. That one kid in the viral
Yeah.
clip, especially, um, and it was I felt so bad for Peterson, because it's like he had walked into there in good faith. He wasn't trying to
Right.
present himself as something he wasn't, but it sounds like maybe the organizers had. Um, and that was a lot of people sort of look at that as a bit of a watershed moment in a bad way for Peterson, because it showed how he'd sort of lost his grip on his finger wasn't on the pulse of things anymore, I guess, or the zeitgeist. And it's this image of Gen Z kind of rejecting him, where maybe he spoke very well to elder millennials, let's
Hmm.
say, um, but this kind of it's a generation that knows not Peterson, right? To sort of
Yeah.
use a biblical phrase. And it's just now they're listening to Nick Fuentes and those kinds of voices. And it's like, okay, boomer, like they're
Yeah.
not really
Right.
tuning into him.